Good morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to From the Nosebleeds. I'm Joey Gunnar, joined today again by Anilo Piro. AP, how you doing this morning?
What's up, brother? Kind of picking up the pieces from what was the Denver Broncos season. Had the opportunity to go out there yesterday for the exit interview portion. Heard from a handful of different guys. We can get into some of those details throughout the course of the show. I think Broncos country is going to want to know about, but we've also got you covered online at denversports.com, social media as well. But it's starting to set in, right? Like yesterday, it was a lot of reaction, and it's like, okay, this happened. Like today is like the second stage of like processing of, this Denver Broncos team is not going to play football for a long, long time now. And it is what it is. It sucks, but it is the reality of the situation, my friend.
Yeah, how was the mood down there? I can't imagine it was, happy. It had to be a pretty dull area to be around. I know a lot of the guys spoke. What were some things that really stuck out there yesterday?
Yeah, again, I think we're just kind of in the acceptance phase of all of it. Not saying that there was any denial necessarily, but like there was raw emotion, shock, and awe that took place after the game on Sunday when we heard from the players. And then obviously at the radio station when you wake up on Monday and it's kind of your first crack to talk about the game. But noticeable things that we saw from the exit interviews yesterday. J.K. Dobbins was talking about how he was 100% going to play in the Super Bowl. And he talked about how there was a chance, he was fighting to try to get out there for the AFC Championship game, but the Broncos ultimately decided not to push it with him. Alex Singleton, who's from California, was talking about how, I think he had like an Airbnb or something booked. Like these guys were planning for the trip to San Francisco to go play in the Super Bowl. That was the expectation. Unfortunately, it did not come to fruition, and away we go. But yeah, I even think from the players, right? A lot of, frustration, sadness that we maybe felt in the locker room on Sunday. Not saying that wasn't present there yesterday, but I think we're just on to kind of the acceptance phase, the reality of the situation, if you may.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up J.K. Dobbins because that's kind of what I wanted to base the show around, just talking about what went wrong for the Broncos this year and what really held them back from winning it all. And I think J.K. Dobbins and not having that rushing attack that you had earlier in the season that really helped win you games in a multitude of different aspects and different examples. I mean, there were so many games that were won because J.K. Dobbins was really that workhorse, and him being out seems like one of the biggest problems and the thorns in the side of this Broncos team later in the season when they were playing without him. And of course, in the playoffs, when they couldn't get a running game started, how big of a factor was that? Because I think it's as big as it can get, especially with somebody who, as I said at the time, because Bo Nix wasn't playing very well during the beginning portions of the season, was the most important piece on the offense. And without him, I mean, you're losing something that's unimaginable. And clearly that was very prevalent in this game up against the Patriots on Sunday.
Yeah, I think it was a major factor, and I'm forgetting now off the top of my head who kind of mentioned the injuries and kind of the thought of how they maybe caught up to him. I forget who it was, but there was the sentence or the saying of like, usually the teams that are healthiest in the playoffs end up going the farthest. And the reality of the situation is the injury bug really plagued Denver throughout the course of the season. I mean, Dre Greenlaw never really fully got healthy. I mean, he was healthy, but you know what I'm saying? Like didn't hit his full stride, rather, I should say, with the Broncos this season. And we talked about it extensively yesterday with respect to J.K. Dobbins. I mean, that's a guy that kind of changed the whole dynamic of this Denver Broncos rushing attack compared to what it had been in previous seasons, at least in Bo Nix's rookie season. And to lose him, Denver really never had a plan B, right? RJ Harvey, I think, was fine for a rookie. I do think RJ Harvey still has a bright future in this league with the Denver Broncos, but RJ kind of turned into that dual threat. He can catch it, he could run it, right? They didn't have like a tried and true horse back there after J.K. Dobbins went down. So that's frustrating. We talked about the wide receiver room yesterday, losing Troy Franklin, losing Pat Bryant, guys that were making contributions throughout the course of the season. So, and obviously the most important position, the quarterback position, right? You lose your starting quarterback, you lose the heartbeat of your team in the process. So I do think the injury bug caught up to them there towards the end of the season. But to kind of bring it back to your initial point, man, J.K. Dobbins was a massive part of the success for the Denver Broncos this season. I know they won a handful of games without him, and, I know they won a playoff game without him, but even if Bo Nix is hurt, which he was obviously in the AFC Championship game, you feel maybe a little bit better about their chances, and maybe the game plays out differently if J.K. Dobbins is out there. Of course, we'll never know, but I do think running back will be a point of emphasis for them to address this offseason.
Yeah, and that same exact thing could be basically said about Bo Nix. And we may have touched on it a little bit yesterday. And I was actually talking with Richie Carney and Drew Spivak over in the fan studio yesterday about what the game would have looked like if Bo Nix was playing. And there's a lot of what ifs, and that's really all that we could talk about right now, because all we're wanting to know this week is, what if Bo was healthy? What would the game have like? That's what people's minds immediately go to when you lose your star quarterback and have to play a game with this much magnitude with a backup. And I don't know, we may have touched on it a little bit yesterday, but I want to, dive a little bit deeper into it. How much of a better chance do you think the Broncos would have had to win this game if Bo Nix was playing? Because I went all in on Richie and Drew talking about how the Broncos would have won by a healthier margin if Bo was playing.
Look, I don't want to put words in people's mouths around the station or in Broncos country, but I think the verdict, like if you would have told me the game would have played out the exact same way, right, with Drake May struggling and the low scoring from New England, I would think it's almost a unanimous thought that the Broncos would have won that game with Bo Nix out there at quarterback, because really all you needed was some competency at the position. And, Jared Stidham had that for about the first 15 minutes or so of the game, and then it all kind of just fell apart. And we could play the what if game as much as we want. And look, it's always hard, like naturally going from a starting quarterback to a backup quarterback, especially with the heightened intensity of the game being in the AFC Championship. I know Zach Bye talked about it extensively on the drive yesterday, and it just sucks, but I firmly do believe that if Bo Nix is playing in that game, they do figure out a way to win the game.
Yeah, and they probably convert that fourth down too, that huge one that everybody's been talking about all week, because and again, I don't know, this is all what ifs, but I feel like if Bo Nix is given that call, he's going to be like, just give me the ball. Just give me the ball. Let me run it forward. Again, I don't know Bo personally, and I don't know what goes on in his mind, but I feel like that's the kind of energy that guy has. And it feels like that game would have played out entirely differently, starting and stemming from that snap right there. It would have been completely different.
Well, let me say this real quick, Joey. I'm not sure. I think the likelihood of them converting the fourth down obviously goes up with Bo Nix back there. But I think to even kind of take it a step further, I don't think it would have been as catastrophic for the outcome of the game if they hadn't converted the fourth down there, if Bo Nix were playing, because then you feel more comfortable about Bo's ability to, go get one back and go make some plays, right? Like the playmaking ability was just not there with Jared Stidham as it was with Bo Nix. So yes, I agree with you. I think there's a higher likelihood they convert the fourth down play. But again, I think if they don't, they still figure out a way to move the ball down the field, unlike Jared Stidham was able to.
Yeah, and then they're not finding themselves stuck on the other side of the field and throwing a backwards pass that ends up being the one and only touchdown for the Patriots. There are certain mistakes that backup quarterbacks make and will always make that the starting quarterbacks, especially ones that have been trained and have learned from one head coach their entire career, which has been short, of course, for Bo, but he's not going to make that mistake. Jared Stidham, on the other hand, did make that mistake, the backwards pass. And that is, again, where you see a shift of momentum, a huge shift of momentum leading towards the Patriots side, and the game never felt the same after that. So we talked about the injuries. We haven't really moved on to anything bigger than the game that wasn't injuries. Was there anything that stuck out to you, whether it was defensive inconsistency, offensive inconsistency, that you saw throughout the season that really became prevalent in that AFC Championship game? And I know it probably wasn't the defensive inconsistency because they played their hearts out, but offensively might have been a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, defensively, I don't really think you could ask for much more from this Broncos team. I know they maybe hit a lull in the middle of the season there. You think to Washington, I know they won the game, right? Green Bay, they gave up some points, won the game. Jacksonville's obviously staying defensively from them this season. But I think the totality of what this defense was able to do this season was the expectation and, frankly, was the standard. So I don't think we can necessarily nitpick too much. I mean, if you want to nitpick the defense, it's probably the Riley Moss holding calls and maybe a little bit of up and down play from Alex Singleton at times, although he did come out yesterday and feels like he had the best season of his career. And I would actually agree with that. I thought Alex Singleton was really good for this Broncos team this season. We'll see what happens with him moving forward. But, to me, it's all about the offense. And I'm looking at the schedule right now, man. I mean, what was their most impressive offensive victory of the season? I mean, I guess you could say Cincinnati when they won 28-3.
Cowboys, probably.
Cowboys, yeah, it's actually Dallas. Excuse me, I forgot about that one. 44 to 24.
It was a Cowboy. That was an incredible offensive performance. That's where everybody kind of died down on the inconsistency talks, but right after that, they went right back to it.
Well, and that's my point. Is like, look, I'm not saying they want to put up 44. They can't put up 44 points every single game like they did against the Dallas Cowboys. And that was the worst defense in the NFL that we've seen in a long time in
Yeah.
that game, just for what it's worth. So that was kind of the expectation, right? They put up 28 points on the Cincinnati Bengals. They put up 34 points on the Green Bay Packers. But again, if you remember that game, Green Bay felt like they were in control for the first half of the game. And the injury to Micah Parsons and the injury to Christian Watson really feel like it helped switch the momentum in Denver's favor. So there really was maybe a couple of, like, I'd say 3: Bengals, Cowboys, second Raiders game, quote unquote, dominant victories from the Denver Broncos offensively. And they came against, some of the worst teams in the NFL. I understand Dallas put it together in the middle of the year, but they were no good for a majority of the season. The Raiders have the number 1 overall pick. You played the Bengals without Joe Burrow. So, that was to a certain extent what you expected from this Broncos offense. And so, again, going back to the point that you and I made yesterday, like, I want to see the Broncos go out there and hang some points on some better teams next season. And I know that there's some people, they won the game, right? All that matters is you win the game. I agree. Winning is all that matters. But now the pressure and the expectation on this team is going to be cranked up heading into next season. I mean, you tell me, Broncos country, let us know in the comment section. Is the expectation not to at least get back to an AFC championship game? Right?
It should be.
This season was a bit of house money to a certain extent, right? It was about building upon your playoff appearance. What the Broncos did by getting the 1 seed, going 14-3. I mean, anything less than 12 or 13 wins next season, which I think is very much on the table and has a good chance to happen, will probably be disappointing for this Denver Broncos team and their fan base. And so the way that I look at it, Joey, is they've got to shore up their skill position players. That's running back, that's wide receiver, that's tight end, because now the pressure and the target's going to be on their back, right? They're going to play a first place schedule. As thrilling as those come from behind wins for them were last season, it's not a sustainable way to, I think, get to 13 or 14 wins every single season. At some point, you're not going to be able to come back in just about every single game as the Broncos did. So enjoy this season for what it was, but it's time for the Broncos to get to work on building for next year.
So in the most impressive offensive performances, where do the Bills come into that in the playoffs? Because I think that the offense was the one reason that they won that game. I mean, the defense, the 5 turnovers was incredible. Well, but every other drive the Bills scored on, the Broncos had to get into a shootout with them, and they won it. And that's the one thing I remember doing a show last year when they were playing the Bills in the wild card, and I was like, if you get into a shootout with the Bills, it's already over. And I think I said something very similar to that when we were talking about that Bills game in the divisional round. And they ended up winning in a shootout. So, I mean, that has to be up there in a certain place too, right?
I completely agree with you. And look, fair or unfair to kind of handicap and pick on the offense or the defense in respective games. Like I said, the reality of the situation is you need to be back in that position, right? And so, yes, I think that Bills game showed you a lot of the potential from this offense, a potential that maybe we didn't see play out for a handful of games throughout the course of the regular season. So the way that I'm kind of looking at it now with this Broncos team is, okay, you showed you could hang with the big bad Buffalo Bills. You showed you could hang with the Green Bay Packers, right? The Jacksonville Jaguars put some egg on your face, but like now we're at the point where the expectation is completely like you need to replicate that now. Like there is no more home underdog narrative. I mean, the Broncos, bearing an injury next season, should be favorites in just about every single home game that they play next year. So to me, what this season represented is this team is here, they're ready to go, and now it's time for them to build upon it. So I think you bring up an excellent point with respect to the Buffalo Bills, but that's kind of in the past now. It didn't translate to the New England Patriots, and I understand the quarterback drop-off, right? But I'd make the argument that the Buffalo Bills were the more tough competition compared to that of the New England Patriots, and Denver, was unable to get the job done in that game.
I 100% agree. The Bills were my team that should win it all, honestly. I was like, whoever comes out of this matchup is likely going to go to the Super Bowl. Now, of course, that didn't end up being right, and another one of my takes was wrong. So I'm going to stick with my Payton Watson as Kevin Durant take, and I'll hang my hat on that one. But other than that, not too great in the sports takes department for this one. But talking about the way they won some games, we look at the Jets game and the first Raiders game. They were ugly. Sean Payton kind of alluded to the fact that he slows down later in games. How important is it for him to pick it up next season and do exactly what you said, hang some points on some teams, have games where Bo Nix throwing for 3 touchdowns, have games where RJ Harvey's rushing in for 2. I feel like that, and I know, again, like you said, a win is a win. but it matters to the rest of the league and how people view you, because if this Broncos team was 14-3 this year and was winning games by double digits every time they played, the Patriots mentality in that locker room would be a lot different than they had out there. It looked like they were ready to go beat up on the Broncos and make a statement that they were actually the best team in the AFC, when I don't think that that was the case, but it looked like it when you watch the way that they won games separate from the Broncos. It feels like it's the utmost importance to establish a culture of dominance in Denver right now while you have a young team. And that was not done this season, but it can be done next season if you grow upon what you did this year.
Well, that's where I think it kind of applies to doubling down on skill positions offensively, because look at what this Denver Broncos defense is, right? They've got star power across the board. You've got the reigning defending defensive player of the year now in Pat Surtain, so you feel good about cornerback. I mean, Zach Allen, Nick Bonito, Jonathan Cooper, those three, kind of the three-headed monster rushing the quarterback, is about as good as it gets right now in the NFL from just a complete standpoint with multiple different players. So you want to try to channel that same energy on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, you and I talked about it yesterday. Like, there's nobody on that Broncos offense, at least in my opinion, that opposing teams like fear, like the same way that you would a Jamar Chase or a Justin Jefferson or, a Saquon Barkley for the Philadelphia Eagles, right? And obviously that's hard to come by. Like, you got to draft right, like maybe Pat Bryant, not saying he is, but like you hope that one of these guys kind of separates themselves from the pack. But like, Courtland Sutton is a good player. Pat Bryant, I think, is going to be a good player. I think Troy Franklin has some nice things going for him, as does Marvin Mims. But you need just like some solidified commodities, whether that's running back, tight end, or wide receiver. And so that's where I think this is maybe the most important offseason the Broncos have had in quite some time, because Sean Payton has gotten them back to relevance. They're back to their winning ways. They're back in the playoff and championship conversation. But now for them to go out there and actually win a championship, heck, even get to a championship, I think there's a lot of TLC that needs to happen on the offense and just inject some new life, some new breath. I mean, remember that offseason, I forget exactly which year it was, when the Denver Broncos went out and got Emmanuel Sanders, right? And they said goodbye to Eric Decker, and they moved on from some other guys. Like, that type of offseason ultimately helped catapult and take Denver from this championship competing team to a team that was expecting to win Super Bowl 50. And so, we'll see what happens with this Denver Broncos squad, man. We'll hear from George Payton, Sean Payton, and Greg Penner here in about 45 minutes or so, and we'll get their opinion on the year. But the Broncos are in a good spot. They just got to build upon it.
Yeah. All right, I want to hit with one last thing, and I just want to read some names of wide receiver free agents that are coming out this year. And I just want to read like 5 of them maybe and get your take on if you'd like him here. Mike Evans, first off, he's a free agent.
I don't think he's leaving Tampa, but yeah, I'd like him here. That's not a bad option.
I doubt he's leaving Tampa, but he's the number one player up there when you look up wide receiver free agents. He's coming up top. Christian Kirk on Houston.
See, Christian Kirk had, some good playoff moments, but Christian Kirk isn't much different to me than like Courtland Sutton, if that makes sense. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but I don't think it's like a game-changing addition necessarily.
Okay, this one I like a lot. Deebo Samuel.
I think Deebo's maybe washed, bro.
You think so? I thought he had a great season this year. He
had
a really hot start, and he continued being a great receiver throughout the rest of the season. And the Commanders were garbage, but they lost their starting quarterback, their star rookie of the year quarterback. So
my thing with Deebo is he's a guy that relies on explosiveness and shiftiness, and the older you get, the harder it is to come by. I'm looking for more of a vertical threat, if that makes sense, which is why I think Mike Evans would, in theory, be a nice fit for Denver.
What about somebody like a Rashid Shaheed?
Well, he made a big impact for the Seattle Seahawks, I believe. Yeah, I mean, that could be an interesting one too.
Okay. All right. Well, there's those 4. Maybe the draft is a better place to look, but we'll keep our eyes on it. That's where our heads are at now. We're full steam ahead towards the NFL draft. It should be a fun one this year. If I had to make a call early, I would say get ready to see a skill position draft from the first round. And I'm talking offensive skill position. Should be a lot of fun to watch. Anilo, thank you so much for joining. I will see you next week. Everybody else, I will see you all tomorrow. Until then, y'all have a great rest of your day. Bye, y'all.